Good morning. And it is so sad that I can't be there for this last course, but I wanted to make sure you had a chance to get a crash course in trauma-informed educational practices. This is something that's near and dear to my own heart. I'm going to do my best to give you as much information and opportunity to integrate it as possible in these 10 minutes. Trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. Gabor Mate. Gabor Mate is one of the most well known scholars on trauma in the world. And this is really what the core of trauma informed education comes down to. Any experience can be traumatic depending on how you are interpreting it inside of yourself. So, what is trauma informed pedagogy or trauma informed teaching and education? Well, it's a holistic approach to seeing not only the mental and intellectual state of a student, so what they're learning, the content, but also understanding their environment, relationships, and any other internal or external factors that may impact their capacity to learn, relate to others, or even trust educators. An approach to education that prioritizes security, connection, consent, and trust for our students. And it shows an awareness of the ways in which trauma may impact their educational process. You can see the picture, hopefully, that says this child's behavior is so hard, we don't know what to do. And it shows a picture of these little plants with all the roots of different things that could be traumatic. And the way to figure out some of these bizarre behaviors is to understand the underlying causes. So, why does it matter? ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. In the beginning of last year, we talked a little bit about this, about these adverse childhood experiences. And what it boils down to is that these experiences are also known as toxic stress in our children and youth, right? So there's good stress, like growing up, growing muscles, but there's also toxic stress, which causes long-term significant health damages. And you can see a long list there. I'm not going to repeat it. Take a moment to look through it, but there's a lot more going on. Also, it is important to note that the pandemic was itself an adverse childhood experience. It removed students from their social groupings in school. It also created a worldwide kind of like anxiety. And so just being aware of that is important. Every student you have has at least one adverse childhood experience. The impacts are researched frequently and they are widespread. Mental health, physical health, and also there are negative impacts for behavior later in life, substance abuse, increased risk of human trafficking, increased work of involuntary sex work, and generational cycles of these childhood experiences and trauma. So I've got a few quotes here in the in the effort to avoid taking up all my time reading other people's words. I'm going to provide the slideshow and you can take some time to read through these, but basically heart conditions, mental health. And why does it matter? Because in 2018, this was before COVID-19, when we've got our guaranteed 100% of our students have one adverse childhood experience. 26, that's 1 in 4 adults reported having 3 or more ACEs. And females, American Indian, and Alaska Natives are at risk, even more so than other students. So 2023 reports indicate that 1 in 7 already by age 17 have at least two ACEs. Nationwide, 1 in 5 have experienced 4 or more ACEs. Wherever you're teaching, you will have students who have trauma. Think about 4 students in your classroom. We're going to do a quick think, pair, share. This really should be just, 30 seconds. I want you to just imagine any 4 students in your classroom. So take one moment. Once you've got the 4 faces in your mind, half of them have at least one ACE already. So that's 2 of your 4 already have experienced trauma. One has already experienced multiple traumatic events. One in your group is likely to experience more than 4 adverse childhood experiences by graduation. So I want you to just understand, if you have a class of 32 people, that means eight. of your students will already be severely impacted by trauma. And if you're in high school, even more so. So take one out for COVID, take another one out for who's already got multiple traumas. And then we can see that we have one who will have an increased risk. Now, think, pair, share. Take a moment and just tell your table neighbor in one word how you feel. I want a feeling word here: angry, sad, scared, anxious, happy. Moving forward, as we address our students with trauma, one of the most important things to understand is amygdala hijack. You'll often hear me talk about lizard brain if you've had any extended conversations with me. But amygdala hijack is when our amygdala, our lizard brain, takes over at any sign of perceived danger or threat, including shame or anxiety. So this is important for you to understand that it's not a real danger, it's a perceived danger, and our amygdala hijacks and turns us into survival mode. If our students are reacting from here in our amygdala, they cannot function in their reasoning brain here. You cannot educate a student who is in lizard brain. Their entire focus is on survival. The trauma response, all, some, or none, you may see any of these responses: fight, that's aggressive, combative behavior; flight, running away, eloping, hiding; fawning. Some of you have seen this with some of your highest people pleasers who just want to be perfect. Perfectionism is a great response for many people. And then we also have freeze. This is when people just shut down, right? And then this one, you've got a little gif of a little doggo doing the flop. But this is when people get to the point where they literally just can't even. You know that phrase, I just can't even? And that's what this is. Flop is I just can't even. So what does it look like for our students? Well, if you've gone through any CPI or right response training, you know, and safe schools too, behavior is communication, right? Emotional shutdown, rocking back and forth, sudden tears or emotional outbursts, drastic changes in behavior, even stoicism, dissociating and becoming completely neutral, people pleasing or perfectionism. All of these are indicators that they may be struggling with something beneath the surface. At this point, we need to be able to move forward and get past the trauma. So I have a couple case studies and I want to talk with you about them. Case study number one. I have extensive trauma in my background. I had probably 5 or 6 ACEs, but more than that, in my adult life, I had significant trauma that created complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, in my daily life, most people don't know this. However, in 2016, I was having a conversation with someone about the election. And what happened is I had a conversation in which I was told that the only reason I didn't like a particular politician was because I had been raped. And I wouldn't feel that way. And I wouldn't hate all men if I didn't feel that way. That was what my panic attack looked like. I completely shut down. I was shaking on the inside. I felt like I was having a heart attack. I couldn't breathe. But I just went completely stone-faced and neutral. That was what it looked like. You can see right here, I don't look dramatic. I didn't fight. I walked away. But if we look at case study number 2, recently I had another panic attack just this year. And actually, Lachey got to be part of that as I walked through a panic attack and anxiety about my field supervision. And it manifested as anxiety. I had digestive issues for days. I had chronic migraines until the issue got resolved. There's no one size fits all for trauma responses. I have a number of students who are going through significant trauma, and they all look different. So as an educator, you may be wondering, like, well, shoot, if every response is different, then what the heck do we do? Think about triggers and glimmers. These are 2 terms that are pretty common in the neurodiverse community. And what they are is just a little catchphrase, a little shorthand to explain. A trigger is anything that recreates a traumatic scenario in our brain and sends us into amygdala hijack. A glimmer is anything that takes us out of our amygdala and moves us back into that reasoning brain. And it can also be just something that makes you happy and releases dopamine and endorphins. Our brains are pretty savvy and really want to come back into homeostasis. Believe your students. Know your students. Know what sets them off. Know what makes them happy. Use those two in balance to observe and respond. Don't react. Observe, respond from a place of knowing your student and interacting and connecting with your student. So I've listed here a number of early indicators of a potential trauma response. You can always come back to this, review the slide deck later, but really you're looking for drastic changes that seem atypical. We all know that some of our kids are just really explosive personalities. Some of our kids are really over hypochondriac in their mental state. But by looking at these, when we see something unusual, that's what we're really looking for. We're looking for those cues from our students that they're moving from that green zone into yellow. Because if we can catch them at yellow before they go into red, we can normally help prevent a lot of these negative impacts in our classrooms. So here are some nonverbal or vocal or non-vocal indicators. If a student who doesn't typically run is running out, then you know there's something to look at. And anytime you see or hear something that you would report to CPS, be aware that that's a trauma. These kids are internalizing things all the time. If you work with special education kids, medically fragile kids, understand that they've been traumatized their entire life, not only by their medical condition, but also by the way that people have treated them because of that medical condition. And it's not addition, it's exponential. Every trauma compacts and reinforces that trauma circuit. Early indicators. Again, a really comprehensive list here. I'm going to encourage you to take some time and look through it. But again, the really big thing to stick with is anything that's unusual or substantially different than normal. And I say normal really loosely because all of our kids are unique. But as you get to know your students, you know your students. You know what they're like. You know when behavior is typical or atypical. When you see people starting to mix up safe or unsafe behaviors, maybe they've started like coming into class completely high, and that's not like them. That's a chance to open a conversation. So, with all of this information, just remember students want to be successful. They don't want to fail. I have yet to meet a student who really wants to fail. All of our students want to be successful, and any unusual or atypical things that happen can be indicators of a deeper issue, and they're an opportunity for us to connect. They're not giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. And if there's one thing you take away from this presentation, I want you to take that away. Your students are not giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. Above all, don't ever say calm down. Don't say it. Just wipe it from your vocabulary. You can invite them into a process of regulation, but saying calm down just makes everything worse because then they feel shame over not being able to perform. Okay, now you know what trauma is and why knowing about it matters for students, and now you know some ways to identify it. And you also have a slide deck with tons of resources. So that's awesome, but what do you actually do with this information in your classroom, right? This is from the Rollins School of Public Health, and they've got a number of different strategies, and there's a long resource list at the end, as well as a resource list that's even more comprehensive on my website. But what I want you to think about are a few different things, and I tried to use all C's to help you trap it into a mnemonic device. But the first one is start with safety and security. You can't do anything if your students don't feel safe. Call out all negative talk. Students, paraeducators, and teachers, don't let it lie. Let your students know you have their back. And default to believing students. They may have misunderstood their own reality because of trauma, and trauma does do that, but always default to believing them and ask for clarification. Don't ever say that didn't happen. That's gaslighting, and that's re-traumatizing. Focus on curiosity, not condemnation. Make it safe. If they're students in your classroom who suffer from poverty or insecure housing, which is increasingly common these days, providing things like snacks and basic toiletries can go a long way to establishing that environment of safety and security that prevents the amygdala from hijacking as easily. And make sure you have a reset zone that's designated and that's comfortable. This is one of the most surefire ways to keep your students engaged in class and still listening, even if they're in a hijack. Next, you want to have compassion. So the word sincere means without wax, meaning it's authentic. And compassion is actually from the Latin to suffer alongside. So when you are compassionate and sincere, you are showing up authentically to your students and you are walking alongside them in their pain. It doesn't mean you have to be in pain with them, but it means that you are observing and bearing witness to what their experiences are. You can listen to about a bajillion Brene Brown videos on empathy to learn more about this, but this also brings into play that culturally responsive teaching that we've focused so much on. Be aware of different cultural values, be aware of different cultural parenting techniques, which may have caused trauma to some of these students. Ask about them. And as my kid always says, discover the villain backstory. You may have a troublemaker who is just out there aggressive and combative. Figure out why. Figure out where they learned that. Figure out how they're using it to be successful and why it's worked for them in the past. There are always reasons for people's behaviors, and they're always trying to help you understand them. Consent is another big one. Consent is important because for anybody who has experienced trauma, a big part of it is that their consent has been violated intentionally, violently, consistently, or through manipulation. This is non negotiable. Don't touch a student without consent. Don't give feedback without asking if they're ready for it. Know that you can never know the whole story, but whatever you do get to learn is a huge amount of trust when coming from a traumatized individual. Always ask permission before sharing any stories or experiences, and have a safe and confidential way for students to communicate when their boundaries have been violated. Communicate, 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 right? You want to understand the laws, you want to understand what's going on, but communicate more than you think you should. One of the things that trauma impacts is memory, and we're going to see this in just a second. But you need to create communication strategies that take that memory loss into account. Trauma affects every area of our memory, which includes short-term and long-term, but also semantic, episodic, emotional, procedural. I encourage you to look at this Bricker handout to see kind of how trauma can affect memory. It's important to just know, though, that if your student says they forgot, it's not always because they're just not paying attention. Sometimes it's because their brain literally cannot remember. Communication again, prep, prep, prep. Have a trauma response drill. If there's a student who has regular trauma response flare ups, create a drill like you would for a fire, like you would for a lockdown. Have a drill in place. We had an open sesame drill. When a student would get dysregulated to a point of explosion, we would just say, open sesame, and everybody knew it was time to open the door, walk across the hall. Really simple, but because they were prepared, they didn't get anxious and they didn't freak out because they didn't know what to do. Assume good intentions, connect before you correct, right? Be brave to engage. Confrontation doesn't have to be negative, but wait until they're out of that trauma response, right? Wait until they're in their prefrontal cortex and practice active listening techniques. A big part of this is what I heard is, can you help me understand? Or can you clarify? Or I'm curious what you mean by. All of these are important things, and also take some time to learn the difference between autistic or neurodivergent overwhelm and shutdown and panic attacks, because they may look similar, but they do require slightly different strategies to resolve. Cultivate a collaborative and creative environment in which students feel like they know they can ask for a break when they need it, in which they feel like they know they can make things work well for them. Celebrate when students are doing well, because they always do. Make sure that you take time for that. Close the stress circuit. One of these rituals of storytelling and community support that the Nagoski sisters talk about in Burnout is that there is an important part of closing that stress and survival circuit. So make sure you take time to share stories and celebrate success and be willing to say, like, I don't know, but we can find out together. It cannot be one size fits all, but we can always celebrate everybody. On these last few slides, there's a few try this instead of this. And there's some examples of sentence stems that you can use with your students. One of the big things is try not to tell students how they're feeling. Oh, wow, you're really mad. No, what I see is you're clenching your fists and your face is very tense and your voice is very down low. What are you feeling right now? Tell me more about that. What set you off? What's causing this behavior? Sometimes they may not know, and then you can offer suggestions. When I do that, sometimes I'm frustrated or mad or angry or I feel betrayed, and they'll normally pick up on the one that suits them. They don't just choose one, but give them a couple options. Honestly, I understand the need for right response in CPI. I have had to use it. However, I think it really does need to be way more of a last resort than we ever thought, especially for those with trauma. So just make sure that if you ever do have to put hands on a student, you can always repair with loving reconnection. So here are some other things. Don't ever say, I'm sorry you feel that way. Say, that experience sounds awful. I wish you hadn't had to go through it. It's just a way to step back and be an observer and a witness instead of entering into the situation and enabling or allowing trying to fix it. We like to fix it, but we can't fix it. So, strategic plans, communicate regularly, and make sure your paraeducators know the difference between traumatic behavior and actually, honestly, all aggressive behavior is communication and often is talking about trauma. So, please don't let your paraeducators ever say they're just bad kids because it's just not true. Don't let colleagues say it's not will, it's not, it's a matter of will, not skill. It's not honest and it doesn't have integrity. So if you have time, there's two videos in this slide deck. I'd love for you to watch them. There's also a much longer podcast with Gabor Mate on trauma and how we can approach it in loving and consistent ways, especially in the circumstances of addiction. And then
Dear
past this, if you want the full resource list and summary, there's a QR code to go to my trauma informed page. And then here are the works that I've cited today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I'm really sorry to not be there, but thanks for letting me do this.